What happens when he ordered a delicate mail-order bride, but a giant Apache woman showed up instead? Witness this unbelievable, true-inspired story right here on Whisper of the Past. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Let's get started. The year was 1885, and the Arizona Territory was still a wild, untamed land where dust devils danced across the desert, and tumbleweeds rolled through scattered settlements like wandering spirits. It was in this harsh landscape that our story unfolds, a tale so peculiar that even the old-timers in the saloons would shake their heads in disbelief when they heard it. Chester Whitmore was a man of modest means and even more modest height, standing at 5 feet and 4 inches tall, with a thin frame that seemed perpetually bent from years of tending. His small general store in the settlement of Copper Ridge, Chester had long accepted his fate as a bachelor. At 42 years old, he'd watched younger men marry and start families while he remained alone, counting inventory and sweeping floors in his dusty shop. But loneliness has a way of making even the most practical men do impractical things. One evening, as Chester sat in his cramped quarters above the store, he spotted an advertisement in a dog-eared copy of the matrimonial news that had made its way west. The advertisement promised connections with refined, delicate women from back east who were seeking honest, hard-working husbands in the frontier territories. Chester's heart raced as he read the descriptions. One woman, listed simply as Miss Abigail Thornton of Boston, was described as petite, well-mannered, accomplished in needlework and piano, with a gentle disposition perfect for a quiet domestic life. The advertisement noted she stood a mere 5 feet tall and weighed no more than 100 pounds, a delicate flower seeking transplantation to western soil. With trembling hands and hope blooming in his chest for the first time in years, Chester composed a letter. He described his store, his modest but steady income, and his desire for companionship. He may have exaggerated slightly about the size of his establishment and the prosperity of Copper Ridge. But what man in love hasn't embellished the truth a little? Weeks turned into months, and Chester had nearly given up hope when a reply finally arrived. The handwriting was surprisingly bold and angular, not the delicate script he'd imagined, but the words seemed agreeable enough. Miss Thornton accepted his proposal and would arrive on the afternoon stage in 6 weeks' time. Chester spent those weeks in a frenzy of preparation. He whitewashed the walls of his quarters, purchased a new bed frame, and even splurged on lace curtains from a traveling merchant. He had a new suit tailored, though the tailor in Copper Ridge had limited skills, and the result was somewhat ill-fitting. The entire town buzzed with excitement about Chester's mail-order bride, and he walked with a newfound confidence, his chest puffed out like a prairie rooster. The day of her arrival, Chester stood at the edge of town where the stage would stop. His hair slicked back with pomade, his new suit buttoned tight despite the desert heat. The other townspeople gathered too, curious to see the refined Eastern lady who would become Mrs. Whitmore. The stage appeared as a cloud of dust on the horizon, growing larger until the thundering hooves and creaking wheels announced its arrival. The stage door opened, and Chester stepped forward, a bouquet of desert wildflowers clutched in his sweating palms. His smile froze on his face as a figure emerged from the coach, blocking out the sun like a monument come to life. The woman who stepped down wasn't the petite, delicate Abigail Thornton he'd been expecting. She was enormous, standing well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders as broad as a blacksmith's and arms that looked like they could wrestle a bear and win. Her skin was weathered in bronze, her long black hair hung in thick braids, and her face bore the strong, proud features of Apache heritage. She wore a curious mixture of traditional and Western clothing, a buckskin dress adorned with intricate beadwork beneath a worn traveling cloak, and boots that looked like they'd walked 1,000 miles. The woman looked down at the tiny, gaping Chester and smiled, revealing strong white teeth. When she spoke, her voice was deep and carried the accent of someone who had learned English as a second language. "You are Chester Whitmore. I am Abigail." The townspeople gasped. Chester's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from a stream, no words emerging. The wildflowers slipped from his fingers and scattered in the dust. But you're not," Chester stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Abigail's expression shifted, a shadow of hurt crossing her face before it hardened into something unreadable. She pulled a worn letter from her bag, the same letter Chester had sent months ago. "You write to matrimonial news. You say you want wife. I answer, I am Abigail Thornton. I take white name at mission school. You change mind?" The crowd had grown silent, waiting to see what Chester would do. Some faces showed amusement, others curiosity, and a few showed the ugly prejudice that was all too common in those times. Chester felt the weight of every eye upon him, felt his dreams of a quiet domestic life with a Petite piano player crumbling like adobe in a rainstorm. What Chester didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was the remarkable story behind the woman standing before him. Abigail had been born to the Apache, orphaned during the brutal conflicts between her people and the settlers, and raised in a mission school where she'd been given a new name and taught to read and write in English. She'd seen the advertisement seeking mail-order brides and saw in it not romance but survival, a chance to find a place in a world that had taken everything from her. She'd known her description wouldn't match what Chester expected. She'd known there would be consequences, but desperation and pride in equal measure had driven her to make the journey anyway, to take the chance that a man who claimed to want companionship might see past appearances to the person beneath. Chester stood there, trapped between his shattered expectations and the weight of his own character. The silence stretched on, broken only by the snorting of the stage horses and the whisper of wind across the desert. He looked up at Abigail, really looked at her for the first time, and saw in her eyes not menace or deception, but vulnerability and hope mixed with fierce dignity. In that moment, Chester Whitmore had a choice to make, the kind of choice that defines a man's character. He could reject her, send her back, become the laughingstock of Copper Ridge, but maintain his fantasy of the life he'd imagined. Or he could accept what fate and circumstance had delivered to his doorstep, for better or worse. What happened next became legend in Copper Ridge, a story told and retold until truth and embellishment became impossible to separate. But that, dear viewers, is a tale for another time. The real story of Chester and Abigail was only just beginning, and the twists and turns that followed would prove that sometimes life's greatest blessings come in the most unexpected packages. If you want to know what Chester decided and how this impossible marriage unfolded, make sure you're subscribed to Whisper of the Past, because we'll be continuing this incredible story. Drop a comment telling us what you think Chester should have done. And remember, history is full of surprises that remind us truth is often stranger than fiction. Until next time, keep exploring the whispers of the past.